The World Cup is happening right now. As an innovator or inventor, are you missing out? In this video, I want to show you how to use time, specifically a calendar, to help you answer that question, not just for FIFA and the World Cup, but for any big event you might be considering. So let's get into it right now. All right, here's the FIFA website. This is the World Cup 2026. It's happening right now as I record this from June 11th to July 19th. One of the big reasons we're obviously getting a lot more attention about this in the United States is this year, it's happening in the United States, Mexico, and Canada. So obviously, I'm getting a lot more questions from inventors asking me, hey, should we be involved in this? Is there some way that we can take advantage? And it seems huge, doesn't it? It seems ever present. But how do you really know if this is a good thing for your invention, your innovation? Should you be tacking on to that, or should you let this one slide? So we need to boil that down to three critical questions we need to ask. Number one, and these are in descending order. First question, should you partner with FIFA in order to put something together that is sanctioned with your product or service? Obviously, you would have been doing this a while back had you been deciding that. So think about this as, what is the next thing you might be thinking of? Hey, do you want to do something with the Super Bowl for the NFL or the World Series for Major League Baseball? You get the idea. The next question is, let's say you have a product or service related to soccer. Is the FIFA World Cup going to give soccer a boost in the United States, in this area, that makes sense to partner along? Even if you haven't partnered directly with the World Cup, it still makes sense to time your innovation or time some marketing efforts or some promotions along with the World Cup, just to make sure that you can ride along with that increase in attention. The third one is, does that attention for the World Cup and for soccer generally apply to all sports? So let's say you've got a sports product or innovation that is related to basketball or American football or hockey or basketball or something else. Does the World Cup begin to give you the kind of attention boost that may benefit you as well? So those are the three questions we're going to answer as we go through this process. What I want to use today as my tool is Google Trends. Why would I do that? Number one, it's free. Anyone can use it, and it's got great information if you know how to use it properly. I've already pre-programmed in FIFA World Cup, of the football competition. And what you can see here in this interest over time, remember this is the past week in the United States, so keep an eye on your filters right here. What this is showing, this is a relative interest. And what's saying is 100 isn't 100 searches over some amount of time. That's not it. It's the intensity of those searches. So 100 being the top, 40 or 39 here being the bottom. So you can get a sense of how search behavior is changing over time. And that's what this is right here. The thing I like about this particular view, and we'll look at more views in a minute, is that you can start to get a sense for what actual Google users are searching for. It's a behavioral metric, not necessarily just what's being talked about right now. So is what's being talked about translating into search behavior on the web? This is a critical distinction that's really important to help make sure that you're not just riding a hype train, that there's actually some movement going on. So this is an interesting first view. And absolutely the first thing I do is I take a look at this 1 week time frame and say, well, let's go back a month and let's start to see. And you immediately start to recognize what's going on here. Right around the 9th and the 10th, remember that the World Cup started on the 11th, search interest is starting to pop up right here. Now, there's a little bit of increased activity here, but think about that for a second. Before the World Cup happened, before it started in the United States, there was very little search activity out here compared to where it is today or on June 12th, kind of day 2 of the contest. So keep that in mind. Now, you could switch this to North America. You could choose any country you wanted. The data are sort of good for some countries, sort of good for others. The United States is pretty reliable. Remember, one of our first questions is, should you partner with FIFA? So what I really want to know is, when I do that partnership, when is the attention going to happen? What I know is, hey, there's not going to be much attention beforehand. But how would I know if that's going to continue into the future? There wasn't a lot of activity before the contest started, but what about after? The way we answer that is we need to go back a little bit further. We might need to see the past 5 years, for instance, the last time that the tournament was maybe in the United States, or the last time there was a big tournament. Now, FIFA happens yearly, but you notice in the United States, it just isn't that big of a deal. Obviously, here we've got top search volume recently. Back in 2023, 2022, we had, October to November 2022, there was a big spike. It wasn't as big as the current one, but it certainly was a boost in attention. What you notice is that that information, that search volume, drops off fast, drops like a stone when this is all done, goes basically back down to baseline. Sometimes you get other little bumps here and there. But when you're thinking about a long-term partnership with FIFA, unless you are working more of on a global scale, in the United States, may not be the best return on your investment, even though for the time it's happening, it's pretty intense. It's not going to carry you out that much further. Let's go back to maybe a 3-month time frame here so we can start to see it. Let's go back even a little further, just a 1 month. Where Google Trends becomes powerful is when we can layer on comparative trends on top of one another. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add soccer as a sport. So let's add that right here. And we can start to see, okay, one of our second questions, remember, was, hey, does soccer get a bump with FIFA? So the big World Cup, the world stage for the best players on the planet, does that make it more interesting for soccer as a general term? And what we learn here is, yes, a little bit. So if you're thinking about, hey, here is kind of the average soccer interest level, and we'll compare that to other things in a second, when the tournament starts, you can definitely see a bump and a little bit of a sustained activity. Let's pull this out now over the past 5 years. What I'm really looking for is, hey, does this bump right here in the past, did it lead to sustained increased attention in soccer during that time? What I see here is, no, not really. That over time, there wasn't much of a bump here for soccer. FIFA went above it for a certain amount of time with an intensity of attention, but there really wasn't a major bump afterwards. Little bit of interest here, little bit of interest here, but it certainly doesn't seem to be tied to the World Cup. So again, if you're thinking about a soccer-related product, the World Cup might give you a little bump, or it might not. So don't tie your soccer-related product necessarily to the World Cup. If you're going to go in and it's something with the World Cup and you've got a global audience, it could make a lot of sense. If you have a soccer-related product, not that interesting from a marketing and go-to-market perspective. The next thing we want to think about is the FIFA World Cup going to give a boost to all sports? So let's say I have a basketball product, kind of a shooting aid, or I've got a football pads or a new helmet, or hockey pads or a new stick, whatever the case may be. Let's start to think about what benefit there might be to targeting the World Cup timeline as a place to either introduce a new product or to do a promotion. So let's add a few in. Let's take a look at baseball, the sport. Okay, great. Let's add in football, and that's American football. Let's pop that in there and see what's going on. Some interesting things already. I bet you can guess what that is. And let's add in the NBA just as an alternative here. And let's add in basketball. That way we can add a few in. I'm going to add in a couple more here, and we'll analyze this in just a second. Let's add in NASCAR, even though it's not a sport in quite the same way. And finally, let's add in, I'm a Minnesotan originally, even though I live in Florida now. So we're going to add in hockey because that's what we do. All right, let's take a look, and we can show and hide some of these. But what this is telling you right away is that the World Cup isn't necessarily impacting other sports. Other sports are on their own timelines. Notice the NFL, coming right here, American football, right around the beginning of the season. No big surprise that peaks, interest in search peaks during that time. Now, if I were to add in the Super Bowl, could you guess when that might pop in? Yes, I think you could. I think you could make a guess. This might be a little bit hard to see, so let's pull that in, maybe even go over the last 3 months. Perfect. All right, what you're looking at here is attention for basketball here and the NBA specifically, baseball specifically. Those are all spiking in their own timelines. What's important to remember is as you're thinking about launching your product or service, just because you have a big event like the World Cup doesn't necessarily mean that it extends to other sports. And you can see out here, let's narrow this in even a little tighter so we can just see the last month. Notice here that other sports, hockey is very low comparatively. Soccer got a little bit of a bump here, but if you notice here, NBA is pretty high. Why might that be? Just had the finals with the Knicks, big market team. You can start to get a sense really quickly for how much of an impact an event will have and how much impact does that have over time. What you're looking for in your product development is an event that triggers a sloping upward curve so that you start to see increased interest over time triggered by that event. That's not what we're seeing here. Let's take a look at some different ways to slice and dice this data. We've been looking at web search here. This is behavioral. This is interest from real people. There are different ways to look at this, though. Let's hop down to news search. This is why people feel that FIFA and the World Cup is a really big deal, because the news interest is so high. This is people writing about the World Cup. This is stories about the World Cup. You notice here that the difference between news and web is the difference between people writing about the World Cup and actual people searching about the World Cup. Those are two really different things. This is a great search to compare when you're thinking, is this all hype or is this real? You can start to get a sense for how much hype there is and how much reality there is. Let's take a look at a few other types of searches. This one is your image search. This is people searching for pictures about this, and you can start to see, okay, the image search. So if you have an Instagram strategy, maybe there is a little bit of a bump here that the World Cup is driving for you. Not much for others, but if I'm going to be thinking about my go-to-market strategy and I am going to be targeting the World Cup time for my promotion, I'm going to make sure that it is image first, or at least I'm going to lean into the pictures more than I might other strategies. We can think about the same thing from a YouTube search perspective, and that's videos. So how popular are videos about the World Cup or about soccer? Not quite as interesting here. So really what I'm learning here quickly is that the difference between my web search and my news search means that there's a little bit of hype going on, which we probably expected. The difference between my image search, which is pretty high for soccer, and my YouTube search tells me that people are looking at the pictures rather than the motion video. Last one I want to show you is Google Shopping. This is starting to tell me who is near the bottom of the funnel. These are people who are searching for a product or service that relates to this, and this is where it gets very interesting. So you as an innovator are thinking, yes, I might want to get attention for my innovation, my new invention, something that relates to one of these things. But are people going to buy? This is the one you have to look at to start to give you a sense for what people are actually looking for to buy. And here's what you learn really fast. Not really. What people were really looking for up until FIFA started is basketball. Basketball was the big deal. That was the big shopping trend. And again, no big surprise. People are buying jerseys. People are buying things for the NBA Finals teams. That one should be pretty obvious. But when you see it like this and you can actually look at it, it becomes really difficult to ignore and make a mistake where you're kind of riding the hype. You want to make sure that you are looking at hard data over time is the only way to really get a sense for that. So is there Google search or Google shopping behavior related to the World Cup? Yes, but also for soccer, also for baseball, also for basketball, not so much for some of the other sports. So again, timing really matters. Let's stretch this out a year. All right, you can see this where, hey, soccer and basketball are consistently some of the higher ones, but you can start to see baseball consistent and a big bump right here in basketball along the finals. This is going to tell you, hey, who is buying the jerseys? Who is interested in shopping and actually near the bottom of the funnel versus, some of the hockey products, some of the NASCAR products that just aren't in that place. To wrap up here, how does this relate to you? Let's say that you don't have a FIFA partnership, you don't do a soccer related product, and you don't have anything to do with sports with your innovation. Any event is going to follow a similar type of pattern. There's going to be a way you need to look at it over time to help you understand, is that event going to drive interest? Is it going to drive attention? Does it just drive hype? What types of attention is it driving? And is it going to drive bottom of the funnel activity to help you sell your product or service? Or is it just going to be an attention builder? What you are really looking for is sustained attention growing over time with an event that might catalyze that. In this case, what you're seeing is these events often are flashes in the pan, and you don't want to invest in those. That's it for this video. Do you have a question about a trade show or industry event or other major news item that you think could drive attention? Drop a link in the comments and I'll do a video on that one as well. Until then, see you on the next one.